My name is Captain Fahd al-Harthi, and I am 89 years old, and I am the man who went viral for being baptized after being a Saudi military pilot and a mocker of Christians my whole life. Captain Fahd, do you believe Jesus is Lord? The pastor's voice echoed through the small immigrant church in Cyprus. I stood in the baptismal pool, my weathered hands gripping the rails, my body frail but my heart, for the first time in 8 decades, finally certain. After 89 years, yes, I finally see him. The water closed over me. When I came up, I was weeping. Within days, millions of people across the Middle East and Europe had watched that moment. But none of them knew what it took to get me there. None of them knew about the storm, the crash, or the 50 years I spent running from the God I blamed for everything. I never imagined I would be saying these words, not after the life I lived. For most of my life, I flew at 38,000 feet, commanding fighter jets, training pilots, mastering the science of flight. I believed only in what I could measure: altitude, velocity, fuel consumption, wind speed. I mocked Christians to their faces. I told them their God was a fairy tale for people too weak to face reality. When a young mechanic in Cyprus told me Jesus died for me, I laughed and said, if Jesus died for me, he wasted his time. I thought I was being rational. I thought I was being honest. I thought I was free. But I was wrong. I was so catastrophically, devastatingly, eternally wrong. A few months ago, at 89 years old, my heart stopped for 19 seconds. I died on that hospital bed. And in those 19 seconds, I saw something. No, I saw someone that shattered every argument I had spent a lifetime building. I went into that cardiac arrest as a bitter old man who believed God either didn't exist or hated me. I came back broken, terrified, and for the first time since I was a boy, willing to believe I could be loved. I do not deserve to be telling you this story. I do not deserve the mercy that was shown to me on that airplane wing, in that vision, in that moment between life and death. And that is exactly why I have to tell it. Because if Jesus waited 89 years for a man like me, a man who cursed his name, mocked his followers, and spent half a century in proud unbelief, then he will wait for anyone. He will wait for you. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a boy in Taif who loved the sky but learned to fear God. I do not deserve to be telling you this story. I do not deserve the mercy that was shown to me on that airplane wing, in that vision, in that moment between life and death. And that is exactly why I have to tell it. Because if Jesus waited 89 years for a man like me, a man who cursed his name, mocked his followers, and spent half a century in proud unbelief, then he will wait for anyone. He will wait for you. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a boy in Taif who loved the sky but learned to fear God. Taif in 1936 was a city caught between two worlds. The old Saudi Arabia, desert traders, camels, ancient rhythms, was colliding with something new. King Abdul-Jej was building a nation, and with it came roads, electricity, and most importantly for a boy like me, airplanes. I was 6 years old the first time I saw one. It came from the west, a small military trainer, its engine cutting through the afternoon silence like a knife. I stood in our courtyard, neck craned back, watching it bank and turn against the cloudless blue. The sun glinted off its wings. It seemed impossible, a machine made of metal, defying gravity, free. I wanted that freedom more than I wanted my next breath. My father found me standing there, still staring at the empty sky long after the plane had disappeared. He was a religious instructor at the local mosque, a man whose face seemed permanently set in disapproval. He grabbed my shoulder hard enough to leave marks. "Stop dreaming, Fahd. A man's purpose is on the ground, in submission, not in the clouds. But I couldn't stop. Every time I heard an engine overhead, I ran outside. I sketched planes in the margins of my Quran lessons. I begged Allah, the only God I knew then, to let me fly one day. Just once. My father's God was not the kind you begged. His God was the kind you obeyed. Or else. Every morning before dawn, my father woke me for prayers. I knelt on the cold floor and recited words I'd memorized, but never felt. Arabic syllables, perfectly pronounced, completely empty. Around me, other boys prayed with tears in their eyes, moved by something I couldn't access. I felt nothing except the ache in my knees and the weight of my father's gaze. After prayers came lessons. My father taught us that God was watching, always watching, waiting for us to slip so he could punish us. Heaven was for the perfect. Hell was for everyone else. And based on the length of his lectures, most of us were headed for the fire. I learned to fear God the way you fear a distant king, powerful, unreachable, and probably angry with you for reasons you couldn't understand. But I never learned to love him. When I was 12, I watched my father beat a student who would fallen asleep during Quran recitation. The boy was younger than me, exhausted from working in his family's shop all night. My father struck him across the face with a leather strap and quoted scripture while he did it. "This is discipline," he said. "This is how God corrects those he loves." I remember thinking, if that's love, I want nothing to do with it. Something hardened in me that day. I still performed the rituals. I had to, living under my father's roof, but inside, I began building a wall. I prayed with my lips but not my heart. I fasted during Ramadan but resented every hungry hour. I memorized Quranic verses and felt only the burden of them, never the beauty. Faith became a prison. God became a warden. And the only escape I could imagine was up, into the sky, where my father's rules couldn't reach me. When I turned 16, Saudi Arabia announced a new military aviation program. They were recruiting young men, training pilots. It was my father's worst nightmare and my only dream. We fought for weeks. He called it foolish, dangerous, a distraction from spiritual matters. I called it my future. In the end, I won. Or maybe he just gave up on me. At 23, I reported to King Abduljij Air Base for training. The first time they let me take the controls of a training aircraft, something inside me unlocked. The nose lifted. The ground fell away. The altimeter climbed, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from my father. Free from the mosque. Free from the God who would never felt like anything but a threat. I was wrong, of course. You can't outrun God at any altitude. But I didn't know that yet. I thought the sky was mine. I thought I'd finally escaped. I had no idea I was just beginning to run. By 1968, I had been flying for 9 years. I was 32 years old, a captain in the Royal Saudi Air Force, and I was good at what I did. Confident. Precise. The kind of pilot who could navigate through sandstorms and land on short runways without breaking a sweat. I had also perfected the art of performing religious duties without believing a word of them. I prayed before flights because it was expected. I fasted during Ramadan because everyone was watching. But inside, I'd built a comfortable atheism wrapped in cultural conformity. God, if he existed at all, was irrelevant to my life at 38,000 feet. My co-pilot, First Lieutenant Khalid Mansur, was my opposite in every way that mattered. Khalid prayed before every flight, not the rushed, obligatory prayers I'd learned from my father, but slow, earnest conversations with God. He kept a small prayer rug in his flight bag. He talked about Allah the way other men talked about their fathers, with warmth, with trust, with the assumption of being heard. I found it irritating. But I also respected him. He was a skilled pilot, steady under pressure, the kind of man you wanted beside you when things went wrong. We'd flown together for 2 years. I considered him a friend, even if I thought his faith was a weakness. On the night of 14th October, 1968, we were scheduled for a routine night training exercise, formation flying over the empty quarter, practicing navigation by stars and instruments. 4 aircraft. Clear weather forecast. Simple. We took off just after 2,100 hours. Khalid had prayed longer than usual before boarding. I'd waited impatiently, checking my watch, eager to get airborne. When he finally climbed into the cockpit, he was smiling. "You know, Captain," he said as we ran through pre-flight checks, "one day you are going to see that God is in control of these skies, not us." I'd laughed. The day I see that, Khalid, is the day I stop flying. We were at 12,000 feet, cruising in tight formation, when the sky turned violent. It came from nowhere, a massive electrical storm that the meteorologists had somehow missed. One moment we were flying through clear darkness, stars sharp above us. The next, we were inside a wall of black clouds lit from within by lightning, the aircraft bucking like a terrified animal. "Break formation." I shouted into the radio. "All aircraft, break and climb." The turbulence was unlike anything I'd experienced. The instruments went haywire, altimeter spinning, artificial horizon tumbling, compass swinging wildly. Lightning forked across the windscreen, so bright it left afterimages burned into my vision. Khalid grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flight suit. "Pray," he shouted over the screaming engines and the thunder that surrounded us. "Captain, pray. Ask God to guide us out." Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was years of buried rage at my father's God finally breaking free. Maybe it was pure pride. I jerked my arm away and shouted back. If God controlled the skies, we wouldn't be in this mess. The words had barely left my mouth when the lightning hit. It was like being inside an explosion. White light. A sound beyond sound. The entire aircraft shuddered. Alarms shrieked. And then, horribly, impossibly, I felt the plane lurch sideways as the left wing tore away. We spiraled. The G-forces crushed me into my seat. Khalid was screaming something, but I couldn't hear over the noise. I fought the controls, but there was nothing to fight with. We were falling, tumbling through the storm like a leaf. Eject. I reached for the handle. Khalid, eject. I don't remember pulling the handle. I don't remember the canopy blowing. I only remember the shock of the parachute opening, the sudden silence after all that noise, and then the ground rushing up too fast. I woke up 3 days later in a military hospital in Riyadh. Fractured left leg. 4 broken ribs. Severe concussion. Alive. The flight surgeon told me I was lucky. The ejection seat had saved my life. The storm had blown me south, and Bedouins had found me in the desert at dawn. What about Khalid? My throat was raw. The surgeon looked away. First Lieutenant Mansur didn't make it. His ejection system failed. We recovered his body 2 days ago. The room tilted. I closed my eyes, but all I could see was Khalid's face in the cockpit, his hand on my arm, his voice, Pray. Ask God to guide us. A week later, the formation leader, Major Al-Jahrani, came to visit. He sat by my bed, his face grave, and told me something that would haunt me for the next 50 years. Fahd, he said quietly, before the crash, Khalid transmitted one last message over the emergency frequency. He was praying for you. He asked Allah to protect you, specifically you, by name. I stared at the ceiling, feeling something cold settle into my chest like ice. The praying man died. The blasphemer lived. If God existed and answered prayers, then Khalid's prayer had been answered, but Khalid himself was dead. What kind of God operates like that? What kind of God saves the mocker and kills the believer? In that hospital bed, I made a decision that shaped the next 5 decades of my life. Either God doesn't exist, or He hates me. Either way, I wanted nothing to do with Him. That belief became my fuel, my armor, my truth. And I carried it for 50 years. I retired from the Royal Saudi Air Force in 1975 at the age of 39. Too many injuries, too many psychological evaluations that noted unresolved trauma and difficulty with authority. The military wanted younger pilots who didn't wake up screaming about falling from the sky. But aviation was all I knew. So I became a civilian flight instructor and aviation consultant, working contracts across Europe and the Middle East. It was during those years, from my 40s into my 60s, that I truly perfected the art of mockery. My work took me everywhere. Athens, where I trained commercial pilots for Olympic Airways. Larnaca, where I consulted on airport operations. Rome, Munich, Vienna. I spent more time in European cities than I did in Saudi Arabia. And it was there, in the heart of what used to be called Christendom, that I encountered Christians for the first time. Real Christians. Not the cultural Muslims I'd grown up with, going through motions without meaning. These were people who actually believed. I found them everywhere. Italian ground crew who crossed themselves before guiding aircraft to the gate. A Greek mechanic in Athens who kept a small icon of Saint Joseph in his toolbox and kissed it before every shift. German pilots who bowed their heads and prayed silently before engine start, even on routine flights. Their sincerity baffled me. These weren't uneducated people. They understood aerodynamics, electrical systems, hydraulics. They could calculate fuel loads and crosswind components. They knew how the world actually worked. And yet they believed in a man who died 2,000 years ago and somehow still listened to their prayers. I thought they were intellectual cowards. People too afraid to face a universe without meaning, so they invented a cosmic father figure to make themselves feel safe. I made sure they knew what I thought. The incident I remember most clearly happened in Cyprus in 1996. I was 60 years old, contracted to help establish a new flight training program in Larnaca. One of the maintenance crew, a young man named Andreas, maybe 25, struck up a conversation with me during a pre-flight inspection. He was checking the fuel lines when he said, casually, "You know, Captain Al-Harthi, I pray for you sometimes." I looked up from my clipboard. "Pray for me? Why?" "Because you seem like you are carrying something heavy." He smiled, genuinely, without any hint of judgment. "I believe Jesus died for you. For all of us. To take away what we carry." Something hot flashed through me. Anger? Fear? I'm still not sure. I set down the clipboard and looked him in the eye. "If Jesus died for me," I said slowly, deliberately, "he wasted his time." Andreas' smile faltered. His eyes went wide, hurt flickering across his face like I'd slapped him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then quietly returned to his work without another word. I picked up my clipboard and walked away, feeling victorious. That night, alone in my hotel room, I felt nothing but pride. I defended rationality. I'd refused to be manipulated by emotional appeals. I believed only in what I could verify: wind speed, altitude, fuel gauges, radar returns. Faith was for people who couldn't handle the cold mathematics of existence. Physics didn't care about your feelings. Gravity didn't respond to prayer. The universe operated according to laws, not love. And I was fine with that. Or so I told myself. But there were moments, small, irritating moments, when their joy unsettled me. Once, during a particularly rough approach into Munich, we hit severe turbulence at 5,000 feet. The student I was training panicked, froze on the controls. Behind us, one of the flight attendants, a young German woman, started singing. Quietly, in German, something I didn't recognize. A hymn, I realized later. Her voice was steady, calm. The passengers near her visibly relaxed. By the time we landed, she was smiling. I asked her later how she stayed so calm. "I wasn't alone up there," she said simply. "I never am." It irritated me for days. What did she have that I didn't? I had 10,000 hours of flight time. I knew every emergency procedure in the manual. But in that moment, she'd had something I couldn't name, a piece that had nothing to do with training or experience. Another time, in Rome, an engine fire forced us to shut down the number 2 engine on a training flight. Standard emergency procedure. I handled it perfectly, secured the engine, ran the checklist, landed safely. But the Italian co-pilot I was training seemed almost serene through the whole thing. "You're not scared?" I asked him after we landed. He shrugged. "God's got us, Captain. He always does." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to explain that I got us. My training, my decisions, my hands on the controls. God had nothing to do with it. But the look on his face stopped me. He was genuinely at peace. Happy, even. He believed what he was saying with the same certainty I believed in aerodynamic principles. And I hated him for it. Not because he was wrong. I was sure he was wrong. But because he had something I'd lost the night Khalid died. He had hope. He had peace. He had someone to thank when things went right, and someone to trust when things went wrong. All I had was skill. And an empty hotel room at the end of every flight. But I buried that feeling deep. I convinced myself I was the rational one, the enlightened one. They were children playing pretend. I was the adult who faced reality. I was so proud of my clarity, my intellectual honesty, my refusal to believe in fairy tales. I was so blind. For 84 years, my body had been a machine I controlled with the same precision I'd once commanded aircraft. I'd survived ejection at 12,000 feet. I'd withstood G-forces that made younger pilots black out. I'd walked away from injuries that should have grounded me permanently. Then, in the spring of 2020, my body betrayed me. The diagnosis came after weeks of breathlessness, of waking up choking, of exhaustion so profound I couldn't walk from my bedroom to the kitchen without stopping to rest. Congestive heart failure, the cardiologist said. Advanced stage. My heart, the organ that had kept beating through storms and crashes and 50 years of bitterness, was finally giving up. How long? I asked. He wouldn't give me a number. With treatment, medication, lifestyle changes, it's hard to say. But Captain Al-Harthi, you need to prepare yourself. Your heart is very weak. My son, who lived in Nicosia with his family, insisted I move to Cyprus for better medical care. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to need help. But I didn't have a choice anymore. The man who would once flown fighter jets at the speed of sound now needed assistance standing up from a chair. The humiliation was worse than the pain. My world shrank to the size of hospital rooms. Gone were the cockpits, the international flights, the respect that came with captain's stripes. Gone was the independence I'd fought my whole life to maintain. Now there were only hospital beds with rails to keep me from falling, medications I couldn't pronounce, and nurses checking my vitals every 4 hours. I, who had commanded crews and trained pilots and made split-second decisions at altitude, now had to press a call button and wait for someone to help me to the bathroom. My pride warred with my frailty every single day. I snapped at nurses. I refused help until I physically couldn't manage alone. I treated every small indignity, the hospital gown, the oxygen cannula, the bedpan, as a personal insult. But the body doesn't care about pride. It just fails, slowly, inevitably, until you have no choice but to surrender. The worst part was the nights. Insomnia. Lying in the darkness, listening to the oxygen concentrator hiss and whir, feeling my damaged heart struggle with every beat. At 3 a.m., when the hospital was quiet and the fear was loudest, I had nothing to distract me from the truth. I was dying. And I had no idea what, if anything, came next. It was during one of those sleepless nights that everything began to shift. I was lying still, eyes closed, trying to will myself into unconsciousness. My chest ached, the familiar pressure that meant fluid was building up again. I heard the door open softly. Footsteps. A nurse came to check on me. I kept my eyes closed, feigning sleep. I didn't want to talk. Didn't want the cheerful small talk nurses always offered, as if pleasantness could somehow improve the fact that my organs were shutting down. I felt her adjust my oxygen tube. I heard her checking the 4-line. Then, so quietly I almost didn't catch it, she began to pray. In English. In a Filipino accent. A whisper meant only for God. Lord Jesus, give Fahd peace. Show him you love him. I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid. She continued, unaware I was listening. He's so afraid, Lord. So alone. Please let him know he doesn't have to be. Let him know you see him. You've always seen him. Then she adjusted my blanket, gently, and left the room as quietly as she'd entered. I lay there in the darkness, my heart pounding, not from failure this time, but from something else entirely. Show him you love him. Love. That word. In connection with God. It felt wrong. Impossible. Alien. My entire theology, everything I'd built over 5 decades, rested on 2 possibilities. Either God didn't exist, or God hated me. Those were the only options that made sense given the evidence of my life. But love? A God who loved me? After everything I'd said, everything I'd done, everyone I'd mocked and hurt and influenced toward unbelief? My chest burned, but not from the heart failure. This was something deeper, something I couldn't name. It felt like a door I'd welded shut decades ago was being pried open against my will. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I couldn't. That simple prayer kept echoing through my mind, relentless as a flight recorder loop. Show him you love him. In the morning, I asked the day nurse who would be on duty overnight. The Filipina woman. What's her name? Maria? She's wonderful, isn't she? I didn't answer. How could I explain that Maria's whispered prayer had cracked something inside me I thought was unbreakable? For weeks afterward, I tried to dismiss it. Old age. Medication. The fear of death making me sentimental. I told myself it meant nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Love. The word haunted me like a ghost. What if, impossibly, irrationally, what if God didn't hate me? What if I'd spent 50 years running from someone who was actually running toward me? The thought terrified me more than dying did. Because if it was true, then I'd wasted everything. And I didn't know if there was enough time left to fix it. 6 months after Maria's prayer, my heart finally gave up. It happened without warning. One moment I was sitting in my hospital bed, eating breakfast. The next, a crushing pain exploded through my chest, worse than anything I'd ever felt, worse than the crash, worse than every injury combined. I couldn't breathe, couldn't call for help. The tray clattered to the floor. Then nothing. What the medical records show: ventricular fibrillation at 0847 hours. Cardiac arrest. No pulse. No respiration. The crash team responded within 90 seconds. They worked on me for 19 seconds before my heart restarted. 19 seconds of clinical death. But those 19 seconds lasted an eternity. I found myself standing on the wing of an aircraft. Not floating. Not dreaming. Standing, feeling the textured metal beneath my feet, solid and real. It was AC-130 Hercules, the exact model I'd flown in 1968. I recognized every rivet, every panel line, the precise curve of the wing. The desert stretched infinitely below me. Not the empty quarter I remembered, but something beyond it, endless, pristine, untouched. The sky glowed golden, a color I'd never seen in decades of flying through sunrises and sunsets. It wasn't the gold of late afternoon or the umber of dawn. It was light itself, somehow alive. The temperature was perfect. No wind. No engine noise. Absolute silence. I should have been terrified, standing on a wing at altitude without a harness, without a parachute. But I felt no fear. Only clarity. A stillness so profound it was almost painful. Then I saw him. A figure stood at the far end of the wing, maybe 30 feet away. I couldn't see his face clearly. The light seemed to bend around him. But I knew. With the same certainty a pilot knows when an engine fails, when wings ice over, when the gauges tell you something is catastrophically wrong, I knew. This was Jesus. Not the weak, gentle figure from church paintings. Not the distant judge from my father's sermons. Just presence. Authority. Love so concentrated it was almost physical. He spoke, and his voice was quieter than I expected. Gentle. Sad. Fahd, why have you run so long? I tried to answer. My mouth opened, but no words came. How do you explain 50 years of bitterness to someone who already knows every thought you've ever had? And then, I don't know how else to describe it, my life played out before me. Not chronologically. Not like a film. More like experiencing every moment simultaneously, compressed into a single overwhelming revelation. But this time, I wasn't just seeing my own perspective. I saw the ripples. I saw Andreas the mechanic driving home after I mocked him, pulling over to the side of the road, weeping in his car because he'd failed to reach me. I saw him praying for me anyway, every day for years, asking God to soften my heart. I saw Maria, the Filipino nurse, praying alone in the hospital chapel during her breaks, tears streaming down her face as she interceded for patients she barely knew, including me. I saw Khalid's widow, receiving the news of his death, collapsing in her kitchen while their 3 children watched. I saw her raising those children alone, telling them their father died praying for his captain. I saw students I'd trained, bright young pilots, hearing my cynical dismissals of faith and building their own walls against God. I saw the cascade of my influence, generation after generation, my mockery echoing through other people's lives like shrapnel. And I saw the crash from an angle I'd never considered. The wing tearing away, the spiral, the ejection system that should have failed but didn't. I saw 1,000 micro-interventions, the exact angle of the lightning strike, the precise moment my hand found the ejection handle, the wind that pushed my parachute south instead of west, toward help instead of empty desert. The Bedouins who found me at dawn, when they shouldn't have been in that area at all. I saw 50 years of survival that I'd attributed to skill or luck, and I saw the invisible hand that had been guiding me the entire time. No, I tried to say. No, that's not. But it was. I knew it was. Jesus spoke again, and his voice broke something inside me that had been frozen for half a century. I guided you in the skies when you thought you were alone. I spared you in the crash. I wept when you cursed my name. And I never stopped loving you. The light around us intensified, brighter, warmer, more real than anything I'd experienced in the physical world. It should have burned, but it didn't. It felt like coming home after a lifetime of exile. I fell to my knees on that wing. Not from weakness. From surrender. Every argument I'd ever constructed, every intellectual defense, every reason I'd had for running, it all dissolved like vapor. None of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered. I'm sorry. I finally managed to say. I'm so sorry. The wing beneath me became translucent. I was falling, but not in terror. In release. In trust. For the first time since I was a boy, I let go completely. I woke to the sound of heart monitors screaming. Nurses surrounded my bed, shouting medical terms I barely understood. Someone was pressing defibrillator paddles to my chest. Dr. Christodoulou stood over me, eyes wide with relief. Captain Al-Harthi, can you hear me? You are back. You are back. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. Someone put an oxygen mask over my face. Later, hours later, when I was stable, Dr. Christodoulou sat by my bed and shook his head. Captain, you are very lucky. 19 seconds. Most people don't come back from that. And when they do, there's usually brain damage. Lucky. He used that word. Lucky. But I knew better. It wasn't luck. It had never been luck. I closed my eyes and whispered the only words I could manage. Thank you. Thank you for waiting. I told no one about the vision. What could I say? That I died for 19 seconds and met Jesus on an airplane wing? They'd think the cardiac arrest had damaged my brain. Dr. Christodoulou was already concerned about cognitive decline. My son would have me evaluated for dementia. So I kept silent. But I couldn't stop searching. It started small. Late at night, when the hospital was quiet and the nurses assumed I was sleeping, I'd pull out my phone and type questions into the search bar with trembling fingers. Near-death experiences Jesus. Former Muslims become Christian. Scientists who believe in God. I felt like a spy conducting reconnaissance in enemy territory, except the enemy kept insisting they loved me. Every testimony I watched, every story I read, the message was the same: grace, forgiveness, A God who pursued people who didn't deserve it. People like me. I watched a video of a former atheist philosopher who would spend decades arguing against Christianity, then converted at age 70. He described the intellectual journey, but also something else, a moment when all his arguments felt hollow, when he simply knew. I understood that. I'd known on that wing, with a certainty that transcended logic. I watched testimonies from former Muslims, some who would lost everything when they converted. Family, home, safety. And yet they spoke of Jesus with such joy, such peace, that I found myself weeping in my hospital bed at 3 a.m., trying to stay quiet so the nurses wouldn't hear. What did they have that I'd spent 84 years refusing to accept? 3 weeks after the cardiac arrest, a package arrived. I'd ordered it online, late one night, half hoping I'd change my mind before it shipped. An Arabic Bible. I held it in my hands, this forbidden book, feeling the weight of it. The last time I'd held scripture, I was a boy memorizing Quranic verses under my father's harsh gaze. That book had felt like chains. This one felt like an invitation. I opened to Matthew, chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount, and I began to read. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. I wept. Right there, alone in my room, I wept like a child. This wasn't my father's God. This wasn't the distant, angry deity waiting to punish mistakes. This was someone who blessed the broken, who comforted the mourning, who promised mercy to the merciful. I read for hours. When I reached the crucifixion in Luke 23, when Jesus hung dying and whispered, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," I had to set the book down because I couldn't see through my tears. He forgave them. While they were killing him, he forgave them. And if he could forgive them, maybe, impossibly, he could forgive me. But it was the parable of the prodigal son that undid me completely. I read it one afternoon, sunlight streaming through the hospital window. The story of a son who squandered everything, who wasted his inheritance, who ended up desperate and broken. And when he finally came home, expecting judgment, expecting to be demoted to servant status, the father ran to him. Ran. Embraced him. Threw a party. I saw myself in that son. The one who took everything good he'd been given, life, skill, opportunities, and wasted it. Spent it on pride and bitterness and mockery. Squandered 89 years. And I saw God in that father. Not waiting with crossed arms and a list of my failures. Running toward me. Embracing me. Calling me son. I closed the Bible and sobbed until my chest hurt worse than the heart failure. But my rational mind fought back viciously. This was a weakness. Emotional manipulation. Old age sentimentality. Fear of death making me grasp at fairy tales for comfort. The vision? Probably an hallucination caused by oxygen deprivation. The brain does strange things when it's dying. It didn't mean anything. I'd spent 50 years trusting logic, evidence, proof. Was I really going to abandon all that now because of some feelings? But the vision wouldn't fade. I kept expecting it to, the way dreams fade in morning light. But it didn't. Every detail remained sharp, clear, more real than most of my actual memories. And the peace I'd felt on that wing, that inexplicable, profound peace, I couldn't recreate it, couldn't explain it, but I couldn't deny it either. I was caught between two worlds. The world of instruments and calculations and provable facts. And the world of that golden sky, that presence, that voice asking why I'd run so long. I couldn't stay suspended forever. I had to choose. When I was finally strong enough to walk without a cane, I did something that terrified me more than any emergency landing I'd ever performed. I searched for churches in Nicosia. There were dozens. Greek Orthodox, Catholic, Anglican. But I found one listing for a small international congregation that met in a converted warehouse. All welcome, the website said. Come as you are. I drove there on a Sunday morning, parked across the street, sat in my car watching people enter, immigrants, expatriates, families, singles. No one looked particularly holy. They looked ordinary. I started the car. This was foolish. I was 85 years old. Too late to start over. But I thought of the prodigal son, the father running to meet him. I turned off the car, waited 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel. Almost left 3 separate times. Finally, as they began singing inside, I could hear it through the open windows. I opened my car door, and I walked toward the building, my damaged heart pounding, feeling more afraid than I'd ever felt in a cockpit. But also, somehow, more hopeful. I slipped into the back pew just as the worship started. The church was nothing like the grand mosques of my childhood or the ornate cathedrals I'd seen across Europe. It was a converted warehouse, concrete floors, exposed beams, plastic chairs arranged in uneven rows. Maybe 60 people scattered throughout the space. Immigrants, mostly. I heard Greek, English, Tagalog, Arabic, languages I couldn't identify. No one turned to stare at the trembling old Saudi man taking a seat in the corner. No one seemed to notice me at all. The service was in English and Greek, both languages I understood. The hymns were simple, projected on a white wall. No pipe organs, no trained choir. Just people singing, some off-key, some with their eyes closed and hands raised. I kept my hands firmly in my lap. But I listened. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. A wretch. That word. I felt it in my bones. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind but now I see. I gripped the edge of the chair in front of me, trying not to break down in public. Not here. Not in front of strangers. The pastor, a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes, spoke about the paralyzed man whose friends lowered him through a roof to reach Jesus. They tore up someone's roof, he said, laughing gently. They made a mess. They probably broke some rules. But they were desperate to bring their friend to Jesus. And Jesus didn't scold them for the property damage. He healed the man and forgave his sins. He paused, looking out over the small congregation. Some of you came here today desperate, broken, thinking maybe you've made too much of a mess to be fixed. But listen, Jesus specializes in desperate people. That's who he came for. I couldn't hold it anymore. Tears slipped down my face, silent but unstoppable. After the service, I tried to slip out quickly. But as I reached the door, a hand touched my shoulder gently. Friend. I turned. It was the pastor, his face open and warm. Not pitying. Just present. You look like you're carrying something heavy, he said quietly in English. Can I help? That gentleness, so unexpected, so undeserved, shattered the last of my defenses. I don't know if you can, I said, my voice breaking. I don't know if anyone can. Why don't we talk? My office is small, but it's private. His office was barely larger than a storage closet. A desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf overflowing with Bibles in different languages. He poured me water from a pitcher and sat across from me, waiting. And I told him everything. The crash. Khalid dying while praying for me. 50 years of bitterness disguised as rationalism. The Christians I'd mocked across Europe, especially Andreas, whose hurt face I still remembered. The heart failure. Maria's prayer. The vision on the wing. The 19 seconds of death that felt more real than 89 years of life. I wasted everything, I finally said, my voice raw. I influenced students toward atheism. I mocked your Messiah. I spent nearly a century running from God and convincing others to run too. How can he possibly forgive that? How can anyone forgive that? Pastor Michael, I'd learned his name was Michael, an Egyptian who would immigrated to Cyprus 15 years ago, sat quietly for a moment. Then he opened his Bible. Captain, may I show you something? He turned to Luke 23. 2 criminals were crucified next to Jesus. One mocked him, even while dying. But the other, this thief who would lived a whole life of crime, he simply said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus told him, today you will be with me in paradise. He looked up at me. This man had minutes, Captain. Not years to make amends. Not time to undo his crimes. Just minutes. And Jesus forgave him completely. You still have breath in your lungs. That means mercy is still open. But I don't deserve. None of us deserve it. He turned pages. Ephesians 2, 8-9. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. He leaned forward. It's not about deserving, Captain. It's not about earning. It's a gift. You just have to receive it. A gift. Not payment for good behavior. Not a reward for years of faithful service. Just a gift. My entire understanding of religion had been performance-based. Do enough good things. Avoid enough bad things. Maybe, God will accept you. That's what my father taught. That's what I'd rejected because I knew I could never measure up. But grace? Grace meant the measuring was already done, and Jesus had done it for me. I want to follow him, I whispered. I want to follow Jesus. Is it too late? Pastor Michael smiled, and I saw tears in his eyes. Captain, it's never too late. Not while you are breathing. Then I want to be baptized. We can arrange that. Would you like a private ceremony? Some people prefer. No. The word came out firm, certain. Publicly. I mocked Christians publicly for decades. I made Andreas cry. I laughed at their faith in front of others. I want to honor Christ publicly now. I want everyone to know. Pastor Michael nodded slowly. Then we'll do it publicly. Next Sunday. If you are ready. I've been running for 89 years, Pastor. I'm ready to stop. He reached across the desk and took my weathered pilot's hands in his. And for the first time in my life, someone prayed with me. Not at me, not for show, but with me. And I prayed back. The week between my decision and my baptism felt longer than all my years of flying combined. Pastor Michael met with me 3 times. We sat in his small office, going through the Gospels, talking about what it meant to follow Jesus. Not just believe in him, follow him. There was a difference, he explained. Belief was intellectual assent. Following was surrender. I was ready to surrender. For the first time in my life, I prayed, really prayed. Not the rote memorization of my childhood, not the desperate bargaining during the storm. I talked to God like He was listening, like He cared, like the vision had promised. And somehow, impossibly, I felt Him listening back. The hardest conversation was with my son. He came to visit on a Tuesday afternoon, bringing groceries I didn't need but accepted anyway. We sat in my small apartment, and I told him everything. He listened quietly, his face unreadable. "Baba," he finally said, "are you sure this isn't the medication? The stress?" "I've never been more certain of anything," I said. "Not even flying." He studied my face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I can see that. You look different. Lighter, somehow." "I am." He didn't convert that day, but he respected my sincerity. That was enough. I also wrote letters to former students whose email addresses I still had, to colleagues I'd influenced toward cynicism. And I spent hours trying to track down Andreas, the young Cypriot mechanic I'd hurt so badly 30 years ago. Through old aviation contacts and LinkedIn searches, I finally found him. The letter took me 3 days to write. "Andreas, you told me Jesus died for me, and I told you He wasted His time. I was wrong. You were right. And I'm sorry I hurt you. Thank you for praying for me anyway. Your prayers were answered." I don't know if he ever received it, but I sent it. The baptism was scheduled for Sunday morning, 14th November, 2021. The small church filled with people, immigrants from a dozen nations, faces I'd seen the week before and many I hadn't. Pastor Michael had mentioned my baptism would happen, and people came to witness it. Someone set up a phone on a tripod to record. For believers overseas who can't be here, Pastor Michael explained. Some of our people have family in refugee camps, in closed countries. They watch services online. I nodded. I had nothing to hide anymore. At 89 years old, I walked slowly to the portable baptismal pool they'd set up at the front of the church. My legs were weak. My heart was weaker. But my resolve was ironclad. Pastor Michael stood in the water, extending his hand to help me down the steps. The water was warm. I stood chest deep, facing the congregation, facing the camera, facing the truth I'd run from for nearly 9 decades. "Captain Fahd," Pastor Michael said, his voice carrying through the small space, "would you like to share your testimony?" I looked out at the faces watching me. I thought of all the years I'd mocked people like them. I thought of Andreas, of Khalid, of Maria, of the figure on the wing. "I spent my life flying," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I flew fighter jets. I trained pilots. I mastered the sky. But I never found peace. Not until I met the one who commands the winds. I wasted 89 years running from Him. Don't make my mistake." Pastor Michael placed his hand on my back. "Captain Fahd al-Harthi, do you believe Jesus is Lord? Do you believe He died for your sins and rose again?" After 89 years. My voice cracked. "Yes. I finally see Him." "Then it's my honor to baptize you, my brother, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." The water closed over me. For a moment, I was submerged in silence, in darkness. And then I surfaced, gasping, weeping, breaking, and finally free. The small congregation erupted in applause and tears. Someone was singing. Others were praying. And I stood in that pool, water streaming down my face, feeling more alive than I had in 8.5 decades. Within 48 hours, the video had gone viral. Someone shared it on Facebook, then Twitter, then Middle Eastern news sites picked it up. Saudi pilot converts to Christianity at 89. The video spread like wildfire across the Arab world and beyond. The reactions poured in. Some were angry, messages calling me a traitor, an apostate, a fool. Some were skeptical, claiming dementia or that the video was staged. But many, hundreds, then thousands, wrote to say my story had touched them. Messages from closet believers in Saudi Arabia who would been afraid to come forward. From struggling Christians in Egypt who would been ready to give up. From atheists in Europe who said they were reconsidering everything. One message came from a young Saudi student studying engineering in Cyprus. Captain Al-Harthi, I saw your video. I've been secretly reading the Bible for 2 years, but was too afraid. After seeing you, a military pilot, a man of respect, I'm ready to stop hiding. Can I meet with you? His name was Khalid. Like my co-pilot. Like God was telling me something. I met with him the next week. Within a month, he was baptized too. Pastor Michael asked if I wanted to respond to the viral attention. I recorded a simple video on my phone, sitting in my small apartment. My name is Captain Fahd Al-Harthi. Jesus waited for me for 89 years. Please don't make him wait for you. Whether you have 89 years or 89 days left, come while he calls. He's calling now. Don't wait until your heart stops. Don't wait until you are old and full of regret. Come home. Now, sitting in my apartment on a quiet afternoon, I look at old photographs spread across my table. Me in my flight uniform at 23, cocky and certain. Me at 40, hardened by loss. I am 60, proud of my rationalism. I barely recognize that man. I spent my life mastering the skies, but crashing my soul. I thought I was navigating by instruments, logic, reason, evidence. But I was flying blind. True vision only came when I stopped trusting my own navigation and finally looked at Jesus. My health is still poor. The heart failure hasn't reversed. I know I don't have many years left, maybe months, maybe weeks. But they're different now. Every morning is a gift. Every breath is grace. I attend church every Sunday my body allows it. I pray for the people who cursed me online. Pray that they'll find what I found. I've led 3 people to faith so far. Khalid, an Egyptian woman from the hospital, and an elderly Greek man who used to mock Christians just like I did. God is using my wasted years. Somehow, impossibly, He's redeeming them. This Sunday is communion. I sit in my usual spot, still the back pew, old habits, as Pastor Michael breaks the bread and pours the wine. When my turn comes, I walk slowly forward, my cane tapping against the concrete floor. I take the bread, the body of Christ, broken for you. I take the cup, the blood of Christ, shed for you. And as I return to my seat, I think of the wing. The golden sky, the presence, the voice that asked why I'd run so long. I know now, with absolute certainty, where I'm going. Whether my heart stops today or 10 years from now, the final destination is secure. My flight plan is filed. Jesus is my navigator. And when I finally take off for the last time, I won't be alone. If you are reading this, hear me one final time. I'm Captain Fahd Al-Harthi. I'm 89 years old. I was blind for most of my life, blind with my eyes wide open, flying through the sky but missing the one who made it. But Jesus, He finally opened my eyes. And if He opened mine, He can open yours. Don't wait. Don't run. He's been waiting for you, just as He waited for me. Every moment you are alive is an invitation. Every breath is another chance. Come home. The Father is running to meet you.